And welcome back. We're moving into our final segment for today, and we've been joined by a cadre of people from World Wildlife Fund International. And we have, joining us for this conversation, we have Nadia Bud, the WWF Belize Office Representative. We have the Advocacy Lead, Valentino Schall, and we also have the Campaign Manager for WWF International, Valentina Montanaro.
Good morning and welcome
to the show.
Thanks, guys.
Good morning. Good morning.
Now, let's just talk a little bit about WWF, and it's not wrestling, but let's talk about the work that you do globally first.
Yes. Well, we launched this report on the 6th of April, and it was really to start a conversation with the key decision makers. So WWF really wanted to open a call to government, private sector, financial institution, and civil society for all of us, really to say we must work together to achieve ecologically sound development. And we need to empower communities, support responsible business, and achieve a sustainable growth. So this report, the main message is really that nature can help us doing that. So through nature, we can achieve sustainable development. Also, however, this report stresses as well that most half of the World Heritage sites, which are the pinnacle of protected area, are at risk from harmful industrial activity, such as oil and gas mining, illegal logging, and large-scale infrastructure. And as we see from this report, Belize unfortunately fit in this picture.
Yeah, it's very easy to tie that all together. And I think you gave the classic example here. Let's talk about the World Heritage Site, first of all, and how the information was put together for the report itself. Do we want to get the Belize perspective?
Yeah, sure. The report, of course, gives a global picture.
Yes.
They look at a total of 229 World Heritage Sites. And among that 229 World Heritage Sites, it's include both natural and mixed World Heritage Sites. And when we say mixed, it's a mixture of natural and cultural, the classification.
Okay.
You know, natural elements, no? And of course, the Belize Barrier Reef World Heritage Site, Belize Barrier Reef system is a World Heritage Site. And it's classified among the 50% of that 229 that are considered threatened.
Okay. And go ahead.
The tagline, protecting people through nature. Let's talk about that, because very often people like to think, you know, that there's often this battle because you want to promote tree huggers more and the trees more than actually looking at how there's great opportunity for coexistence between people and nature.
Well, that's a great point. So, I think like what the report says is that it's time to decouple this idea of like economic development versus conservation, because that's actually what the report shows is not the case. Actually, the opposite is true. And we see that 90% of natural World Heritage sites provide jobs and support economies through tourism, recreation, and natural resources. So those are big numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the report, it states that 11 million people, equivalent to the size of Cuba, depend on World Heritage sites for jobs and livelihoods. So the idea that it's one versus the other, it really doesn't, it's not really comes out in reality and in practice. And the idea, if we look at Belize closer to home, 60% of the visitation we get from tourism, they use the marine environment. So without the marine environment, we don't have that economic activity going. And even more than that, tourism has become the major economic sector in Belize. And it depends entirely on natural resources and marine resources in this case. So there's no question as to what drives the economy, what is the underlying foundation of the economy. So it's not So if we protect those resources, we're not just protecting people's well-being, we're protecting their income as well. So that's why we say we're protecting people through nature. We protect economic growth for the country, we protect growth in the tourism sector. But aside from the services that we value from the marine resources through tourism, these ecosystems also provide other services that we don't necessarily recognize easily, such as the break that the barrier reef provides, or the erosion that mangroves prevent. Those are also very important. So we are
or the food supply from the fisheries products.
That depends on the mangroves. So we are if we protect these things, we are safeguarding our own welfare and well-being. So that's how nature protects us.
Helps in poverty alleviation.
Yes.
Yes.
And going back to job creation as well, with the people who are involved in the fisheries industry, I feel like we're having a conversation about the ban on offshore drilling. So many of these points, obviously, because you're talking about the World Heritage Site and the contribution of, if we were to be specific, the Belize Barrier Reef, this is part of what has been sounded on the local front in terms of why there needs to be very careful consideration when looking at oil exploration, specifically offshore, and we've even had comments about onshore as well. How are the two issues linked when it comes to the global perspective?
It links because that's what we're seeing. There's a trend across the planet when resources are becoming ever scarcer, and places that should be protected are actually becoming under threat from these sort of activities. So oil, gas, large-scale infrastructure, and governments have recognized these places as World Heritage sites. So they have a status that they have committed and they have taken a responsibility to protect. So WWF called for governments to claim this protection within their borders and avoid to allow these harmful activities to happen in these precious places. But as well, this is not only for government, it's a call, as I was saying, for everyone, and WWF really stress that even private sector and financial institutions should refrain from going and accepting the invitation of government to go in these places or fund activities that harm these places.
Yeah.
When you look at the whole coexisting challenge, and one thing I noticed in the report, you lay out a very strong case. You talk about the successes, you talk about the challenges and everything. When you engage people, and it's very people-friendly in terms of the way that it's written, very often when we have reports coming out, people think that it will be very technical and inaccessible. But you read it and you can actually make the linkages, whether you have a science background or not. How much of a shift is that in terms of what WWF does internationally to let people at any level be able to access the information that you are producing?
Well, I think that should be the way you get people on board, because this is not just an issue for technician or conservationists. As we are saying, these are places that have been granted such a status because they've been recognized to be relevant to all humanity. So it's not your barrier reef, it's not my barrier reef or Nadia's barrier reef, it's everyone's barrier reef. So everyone should be able to understand what are the issues affecting these places, which affect as well themselves. Because we're saying, as Valentino mentioned, 11 million people lives in or around these places. So it depends directly. So I think that's the only way it should be done.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to be preaching to the converted. Usually, if reports and communications are very technical, it's the same people you're reaching out, the people that have already been convinced. We need to take it out on the ground to the people in the field, the stakeholders, the communities, and engage them better. And we need something that is very reader friendly for them to be able to digest.
Valentino, in terms of advocacy, what Valentina mentioned earlier is a new aspect that perhaps we haven't discussed very often, and that's looking at companies, looking at the private sector, having them have what is called corporate social responsibility to choose not to degrade World Heritage sites, whether it's going to affect the reef or even coastal communities. Right. Now, when it comes down to the private sector, the perception on the outside most often is that it's all about bottom line. Will it make the money? Is it going to be profitable? And how do you reach this message out to them, that they have a responsibility as well, despite what profits they may potentially get from the activities they want to engage in?
Yes, well, as Valentina said, and as Nadia pointed out, and the report kind of makes it accessible to everyone. So that means that everybody has some level of responsibility. And we are not, the campaign and the advocacy we do is not anti-development, because we need jobs, we need growth, we need wealth creation, we need to address the poverty in the country. And the private sector does a very good job of doing that. What we're saying is that the systems, the ecosystems, the natural resources that helps us to provide those things, we need to make sure that we're using them in a way that we can continue to draw wealth today and continue to draw wealth from it later on. And so, but the other side of that too is that if the private sector that depends on these resources undermine the basis, because that's their asset. If they undermine their own asset, then they are putting their own business at risk. And business people understand business risks. So that's the kind of approach we're taking with them. That's the kind of language we're using, so that they can understand that risk isn't only if something is financially viable. Risk also is something, is it environmentally viable? Because if it's not environmentally viable and socially viable, then your business you might make very good money in the short term, but in a few years you'll have to be looking for a new investment. And that's not the kind of development we need, and that's not the kind of development that they need. They want to have a business that functions far into the future and to keep making the bottom line. So that's the way we are working with the private sector, to get them to understand that. And we have had a pretty good track record with private sector as well, getting them to understand that.
Internationally, has there been any outreach to major oil companies trying to get that first conversation started? Because I can imagine if you talk with maybe a hotel owner, smaller scale, a beachfront is important, but you could talk to them about environmental impacts. But oil companies are usually a horse of a different breed, right?
Well, yes and no. So there has been some work and some positive signals. First of all, there's the World Heritage Committee has repeatedly stated that this kind of activity are incompatible with the status of World Heritage. And as also WWF ran a campaign around Virunga National Park last year. We are still, of course, working there. One of positive outcome has been like big oil companies such as Total or Soko committing to not explore and not go anymore in World Heritage sites. So there is a momentum that we need to keep surfing. There has been as well other commitment from mining organization, but much more still needs to happen. And yes, as Valentino was saying, there's also an understanding from private sector, but as well the finance institution, that there's a risk, an increasing risk in going into these activities.
Now, when you talk about debunking some of the myths surrounding conservation, what are the main ones that you've been able to encapsulate and get people to understand that this is not fact, it may indeed be fiction?
Well, I don't know if you want to talk about Belize for globally.
Yeah.
I think the biggest one is like conservation equals anti-development, and block people from develop or economic growth. And this is not true, and we've seen as well a big signal with last year 191 government coming together to agree to the Sustainable Development Goal that makes a clear link between the need to include environment into the long-term planning. I'm not sure about Belize key meets, but I'm sure they might be on a similar level.
It is pretty much, it's often looked at as we want to lock off the resources. For example, we prioritize wildlife over humans, and that's not the case. And if you think about conservation or trying to put in place instruments to manage the environment, why are we doing this? It's so that the humans can benefit, so that the people can benefit for the long term.
Now, when you engage, and I'll talk to Valentino in particular, because advocacy is such a long-term strategy. It's something that you have to be totally invested in. And marking the milestones, it's sometimes very, very difficult. What would you say? Because I know in the whole campaign, though not led by WWF, in terms of not offshore drilling, that may be considered a serious milestone in terms of advocacy work, in terms of protection and everything. What would you say is perhaps one of the greatest milestones that is still a little bit off in the distance, but perhaps attainable, and something that we could perhaps look at in terms of working towards, and I don't like the word sensitizing, but getting people to be aware that this is something that is within our grasp and could yield benefits to us going down the road?
I think you mentioned it. The two biggest threats to the reef system and the World Heritage sites is uncontrolled development, unplanned development, that damages a lot of ecosystems, either the reef or through dredging or the clearance of mangroves. So that type of development on the coast and along the Keys is one of the big threats, because it has a ripple effects down the ecosystems. The other one, of course, is the threat of offshore oil. If we have these World Heritage sites that are inscribed by UNESCO because of their outstanding universal value, and also because it's clear how important it is economically and socially for Belize. It's Belize. And the biggest threat to that is the possibility of offshore oil. It's very incompatible. It's incompatible with what the World Heritage Committee is saying over these sites, but for us as Belizeans, it's incompatible, because we are talking about, as a country, about sustainable development. So yesterday, the government launched the Global Sustainable Growth and Sustainable Development Strategy. And one of the key, one of the success factors that they feel that we need to have sustainable development is to recognize the value and importance of resources that can provide us with the growth that we need now and growth in the future. And the World Bank also yesterday was saying the exact same thing. So everybody is advising the government on the right path. We are saying the same thing. Belizeans also feel the same way. So for us, the biggest milestone is to be able to get a complete ban on offshore oil, so that we can truly have sustainable development and change the tourism that we have into a more sustainable trajectory as well.
And you're really talking to one of the questions I wanted to get at, which is, how does this report help to build momentum on campaigns already established? We've talked about offshore drilling, for example. We looked at the health of the reef most recently and all the different threats that take place. So how will this help to keep the momentum going on some of the advocacy work and education campaigns that have already been established? Who wants to take that one, Nadia?
Yeah, we see this report as the starting point for future dialogue.
Yeah.
Valentino and Valentina mentioned not only government, we're trying to engage the government, we're trying to engage civil society, but we're also trying to engage strongly the businesses and the financial institutions and put some pressures there as well, no? So this is something that we are coming to them that is, you know, the report is very factual. Most of the work that WWF does overall is fact-based, no? And so it's a way to engage them, get them to the table and discuss how best we can move forward from here.
Sure.
This is a global conversation that we started. Today, we're looking here in Belize, but there's many other more sites at threat. And we hope all the key stakeholders rise and work together to actually address those other sites.
Yeah.
So it's just the starting of a conversation.
I want to see if we can get the map up, the global map. They'll get it up for us right now, just to look at where the threats are and where Belize fits into that. So we can talk about that. Just there we go. So let's just say, obviously, the first thing we'll do as Belizeans is zoom into our particular area, and there's a differentiation between the red and black dots. Tell us about that. Those are threat levels.
Yeah. Oh God, I can't read. I can't remember.
Yeah, one is threatened by harmful industrial activities and other natural World Heritage sites. Red is threat,
Yeah.
So we see that, as you were pointing out, it's a global issue.
It's unfortunately, half of them are under risk from any of these harmful industrial activities. And and I think what is really concerning is that another big issue, water. 2/3 of these World Heritage Site, natural World Heritage Site, are key for provision of water. This is going to be another big issue very soon because, as I was saying, resources are becoming ever scarcer.
Yeah.
So we really need to understand that those see them as opportunities rather than something we need to protect, put fence around. This is opportunity that we need to enhance.
Yeah.
My final question before we wrap has to do with the fact that we've often had a discussion around the fact that quantifying in terms of value, monetary value, what the barrier reef, for example, means to us. Are we any closer to getting monitoring and a monetary value for what the barrier reef is for us?
We've done economic valuation for tourism sector, for the fisheries sector, and for coastal protection. No? So we do have values for those, but there are also the non-use values that needs to be captured. You know, what does it mean to us socially, culturally, for example? So some work in that direction is definitely needed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any final words?
Well, yeah, this is a campaign, and this is an advocacy campaign. It's long term, but one of the things we are doing is we are encouraging Belizeans to take action.
Yeah.
So there is a specific website that they can go to, and they can. It summarizes the main challenges for Belize, and they can click on that and send a letter to the Prime Minister of Belize. And so far we've had several thousands of letters sent already, and we want to keep the numbers going. So we're asking Belizeans to visit our Facebook page, WWF Belize Save Our Shared Heritage, and click on the link there. It will take them to a specific website where they can identify with the issues that they want to address directly to the Prime Minister and send a letter. And that's
where advocacy turns to action.
Yes, this is where the information and the awareness come out. You got to do something. Yeah. You understand the value of this and how important it is, and it's just a simple click, and that will help us to get the message. And we will continue to talk to different stakeholders, but for us, that's a very important step to take.
All right.
Well, thank you all for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks too.
We're going to go ahead and take a final break, and when we come back, it'll be for a wrap. Don't go anywhere. Open Your Eyes concludes after these messages.